The bright lights of the Real Talk studio gleamed like spotlights in an interrogation room. It was supposed to be just another hard-hitting interview with a controversial guest, a chance for Daniel Foster, the ruthless talk show host, to do what he did best. Corner, attack, humiliate. He'd done it 100 times before. But today, Daniel wasn't facing just anyone. He was about to sit across from Donald J. Trump. In Daniel's mind, the plan was perfect. The questions were sharpened like knives. The audience was stacked with skeptics, cynics, critics. Producers worked overtime behind the scenes to dig up old footage, half-truths, anything they could twist into a gotcha moment. The network was buzzing. They didn't want an interview. They wanted a takedown. And Donald Trump? He knew it. That morning, as the New York skyline glowed gold in the crisp October air, Trump sat in his office at Trump Tower. He glanced at the invitation on his desk. Real Talk with Daniel Foster. His advisors had warned him off. He's not there to have a conversation, sir. He's there to make you look like a fool. Trump only smiled. He knew that game. He played it better and longer than anyone else. They were underestimating him. Again, by the time he stepped out of his motorcade and onto the studio lot, the trap was set, but not the one Daniel thought. Inside the studio, Daniel Foster reviewed his note cards one last time. He'd spent days preparing. Weeks, even. This wasn't about politics. It wasn't even about Trump. It was about Daniel proving he could bring down anyone, even a man like Trump. The studio audience buzzed with energy as they took their seats. Some were told to cheer, others to challenge. A few were handpicked to ask loaded questions. Every angle, every camera, every pause was pre-planned. At precisely 7 p.m., the red light blinked on. Daniel Foster strode out to thunderous applause. He wore his signature smug grin, confident this was going to be his finest hour. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "tonight we have a very special guest. Whether you love him or hate him, he's impossible to ignore. Please welcome former President of the United States, Donald J. Trump." The applause was polite but cautious. Some clapped mechanically. Others crossed their arms. But when Trump stepped onto the stage, his shoulders squared, his pace steady, his expression unreadable, the energy shifted. He was calm, relaxed, dangerous in a way Daniel hadn't expected. They shook hands. Daniel squeezed a little harder. Trump smiled. Just enough. They sat. And the ambush began. Daniel Foster leaned forward in his chair, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of his cue cards. His trademark smirk was in place, the one he always wore right before the first punch landed. "Mr. Trump," he began smoothly, "thank you for being here tonight." Trump gave a nod, his expression neutral. "My pleasure." Daniel's smile widened, thin and sharp. "Let's start simple. You've been a businessman, a president, and now a political commentator. Some say you've reinvented yourself more times than anyone in American history. Others say you're just chasing relevance." There was a ripple in the crowd. A few chuckles. Daniel pressed on. "So which is it? Are you adapting to the times, or are you just desperate to stay in the spotlight?" Trump didn't blink. "I'm building things," he said. "That's what I've always done." Daniel's eyes glinted. "But some people argue that what you're building isn't always about success. Some say it's about ego, that it's about control, that it's about power." Trump smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Power is influence," he said calmly. "Influence builds opportunities. Opportunities build jobs. Jobs build futures. So, if I have power, it's because people want what I'm building." The audience shifted again. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Daniel didn't let up. He waved his hand, dismissive. "Jobs? Futures? Some would argue you're dividing the country, not building it." Trump didn't react. He sat perfectly still, perfectly composed. "I'm not dividing anything," he said. "I'm giving people a voice. And people who don't like it call that division." There was a beat of silence. Daniel could feel the ground slipping, just a little. Time to push harder. "Let's talk about your time in office," Daniel said, his tone sharpening. "You've been accused of everything from corruption to inciting division. Do you ever take responsibility for the chaos you've caused?" Trump leaned forward. His voice stayed low. "Chaos." He let the word hang there, heavy. America was stronger. The economy was booming. We had peace agreements in places people said it was impossible. If that's chaos, I'll take it. A few people in the audience applauded. Daniel pushed back. "You're ignoring the protests, the criticism, the scandals." Trump's gaze didn't waver. "I don't ignore anything," he said. I listen. And I lead. The room tightened. Daniel flipped a cue card over. Faster now. You lead? Some say you manipulate. Trump's smile widened, just slightly. If I was manipulating, he said, you wouldn't see it. A few gasps. A few laughs. Daniel felt the shift. This wasn't going to plan. He sat up straighter. You're very good at avoiding the question, Mr. Trump. Trump shrugged. You're very good at asking the wrong ones. The audience stirred. Daniel's jaw tightened. Time for the next move. He motioned to the screen behind them. Images appeared. Protests, headlines, controversy after controversy. This is your legacy, Daniel said. This is what people remember. How do you answer to this? Trump didn't even turn to look. He kept his eyes on Daniel. That's not my legacy, he said. That's your narrative. And suddenly, Daniel realized he wasn't steering the conversation anymore. Trump was. Daniel's fingers drummed against his cue cards, the faint tap echoing louder in his own mind than in the studio. He had planned every second of this interview, every pivot, every pressure point. And yet, as Donald Trump sat across from him, unflinching, composed, Daniel felt control slipping through his fingers like sand. Let's get serious, Daniel said, voice lowering. You've been accused of fueling division, of promoting dangerous ideas. Your rallies, your speeches, some say they inspire hate. Trump didn't blink. Some people say a lot of things. Daniel leaned in. But you won't deny it? You won't admit that your words have consequences. Trump folded his hands together, elbows resting on his knees. His gaze locked on Daniel with a weight that silenced the room. Words always have consequences. That's why I choose them carefully. And when I say America first, I mean every American. But people who don't like strength, they twist it. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Daniel pressed harder. You call it strength. Others call it nationalism, extremism. Trump nodded once. Words again. Some people see pride in their country and call it nationalism. Some people see strong borders and call it extremism. I see a nation that wants to stand on its own 2 feet. I see people tired of being ignored. Daniel swallowed. He could feel it, the crowd shifting. Faces watching Trump, not him. Listening. Some nodding. Do you care, Daniel asked sharply, about how much damage your rhetoric causes? Do you even think about the people who feel alienated by you? Trump's response was immediate. I think about Americans who were alienated long before I came along. People who felt forgotten by the media, by politicians, by shows like this one. Another ripple. This time, stronger. Daniel clenched his jaw. You're turning this into a pity party, he snapped. Trump tilted his head slightly. No, he said. I'm turning this into a reality check. The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel could feel the weight of every eye in the room. He glanced at his producer offstage. A quick signal. Time for the heavy hit. Daniel straightened his notes. Let's talk about January 6th. There it was. The line he'd been waiting to cross. He saw Trump's jaw set. A flicker, just a flicker, but enough. Your supporters stormed the Capitol. Violence. Chaos. People died. Do you take responsibility for that? Daniel's tone was calm, but the attack was clear. This was his moment. Trump exhaled slowly. I take responsibility for telling people to stand up for what they believe in. I take responsibility for telling people their voices matter. But I don't take responsibility for the actions of people who broke the law. Daniel smirked. That's convenient. Trump nodded. It's also true. The crowd was stone silent. A few people exchanged glances. Others just stared. Daniel leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. So, you're the victim. Trump shook his head. No, I'm the guy who's still standing. For the first time, Daniel had no immediate retort. Trump kept going. You can show clips. You can read headlines. But I was there. I lived it. And the truth? It's not in your cards. The audience began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder. Daniel's ears burned. He glanced again at his producer. This wasn't the moment they wanted. Not even close. But Trump, he wasn't finished yet. Trump didn't wait for Daniel to recover. He leaned in, closing the space between them with a steady, deliberate presence. His voice, low and controlled, carried through the room without needing force. You know what the problem is, Daniel? Trump said, scanning the audience before returning his gaze to the host. You think you can control the narrative because you control the cameras. You think you can set people up, cut their answers, spin the story. But there's something you can't control. Daniel blinked. And what's that? Trump's stare didn't waver. The truth. The studio was dead silent. No one moved. The audience had stopped murmuring, stopped shifting. Even the producers behind the glass were frozen. Daniel forced a smirk, though it didn't reach his eyes. The truth, Donald? You mean your truth? Trump shook his head. No, Daniel. I mean facts. You bring me here, thinking you'll catch me off guard, thinking you'll get your viral clip. But you forgot something. Daniel sat still, waiting. Trump gestured toward the audience. These people, they've already made up their minds about me. They're not waiting for your trap. They're watching to see how I handle you. A few audience members chuckled quietly. Daniel's grip on his cue cards tightened. Trump's voice softened. And you know what they're seeing? They're seeing a man who's not afraid to sit here, answer your loaded questions, and tell you exactly what he thinks. Without a teleprompter. Without a script. Applause broke out again, this time louder. Daniel glanced toward his team. They had no signal to give. Daniel sat back in his chair, masking his frustration. Let's talk about the future, he said, pivoting. Do you honestly believe you can lead this country again after everything that's happened? Trump's answer was immediate. Absolutely. Why? Daniel pressed. Trump smiled faintly. Because people want a fighter. They want someone who doesn't back down when things get ugly. They want someone who isn't afraid of a hostile question or a hostile media. They want someone who remembers them when the lights are off and the cameras aren't rolling. More applause. A slow build that spread through the studio. Daniel shook his head. And you think you're that person? Trump didn't blink. I know I am. The applause swelled again, spilling into cheers from a few scattered seats. Daniel's smirk faded completely. Trump sat back, relaxed. You can try to spin me. You can try to twist me into something I'm not. But I'll tell you this, Daniel. I'm still standing. And I'm not going anywhere. A standing ovation erupted from a section of the audience. Daniel's producers scrambled, signaling to cut to commercial, but it was already too late. The cameras were rolling. The footage was live. And Donald Trump had just walked through the ambush untouched. Daniel leaned forward one last time, desperation creeping into his tone. But do you ever regret anything? Anything at all? Trump's gaze was steady, unwavering. I regret trusting people like you to tell my story. The room exploded. Applause, whistles, cheers. Daniel sat back, defeated. The segment ended. The lights dimmed. And Donald Trump stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked off the stage as if he had planned every moment himself. Daniel's team rushed him as the broadcast cut to black. We need damage control, one whispered. But Daniel barely heard them. He sat in his chair, staring at the spot Trump had vacated, realizing the truth he should have known all along. This wasn't just an interview. This was the moment he lost. As the studio lights cooled and the audience slowly filtered out, Daniel Foster sat frozen in his chair, staring at the empty seat where Donald Trump had sat moments earlier. His producers were already shouting commands into headsets, barking orders to editors to try and salvage what was quickly becoming a catastrophic disaster. But it was obvious to everyone in the room that no amount of post-production could change what had just unfolded live in front of millions. The control he had so meticulously cultivated over the years, the power to direct the narrative, to shape public perception, to break down even the most experienced guests, had slipped through his fingers, leaving him exposed for what he was. A man who overplayed his hand against someone who thrived on confrontation. Donald Trump had not simply answered his questions. He had dismantled them, reframing each attack as an opportunity to reinforce his own strength, his own resilience, and his refusal to bend to anyone's script. Every time Daniel thought he had backed Trump into a corner, Trump had simply built a new doorway and walked right through it without breaking stride. The audience had sensed it immediately, and by the end of the interview, they weren't just watching Trump, they were rooting for him, some standing to applaud, others recording and posting clips that were already trending by the time Daniel had fumbled through his closing remarks. As Daniel was ushered off set by his team, his earpiece crackled with bad news, sponsors pulling ads, viewers flooding the network's social media with praise for Trump and criticism for Daniel's obvious bias, analysts on competing networks dissecting the interview and pointing out his failed ambush in real time. The hashtag Trump did not flinch was climbing to the top of every platform. And worse still, the clip of Trump saying, "I regret trusting people like you to tell my story," was already being remixed into videos, GIFs, and memes, spreading far beyond his usual base of supporters. Meanwhile, Trump himself was already gone, having left the studio without so much as a glance back. Outside, the crowd of reporters swarmed him, asking if he had a statement about the interview. Without pausing, without even breaking his measured pace toward his waiting motorcade, Trump gave a short, almost casual reply. The American people know the truth. That's all I have to say. It was delivered without bravado, without bluster, just confidence, and it was more devastating to Daniel Foster's reputation than any fiery rebuttal could have been. Inside the network's executive offices, an emergency meeting was already underway. Daniel was told in no uncertain terms that he would not be leading any more high-profile interviews for the foreseeable future. Sponsors were demanding reassurance that the show wouldn't become a liability. PR consultants were being flown in from New York. Daniel's team was ordered to draft an apology, though no one could agree on who exactly he was supposed to apologize to. The viewers, the sponsors, Trump himself. Every option felt like another loss. As the days passed, the consequences deepened. Viewer numbers plummeted, not just for Daniel's show, but for the network's primetime lineup. A few of Daniel's most high-profile guests publicly distanced themselves, refusing to appear on his program until he recovered his integrity, a euphemism that only underscored how much he had lost. In private, some industry insiders whispered that Daniel Foster's reign as television's toughest interviewer was over. And Trump? Trump continued on his schedule as if nothing had happened, attending rallies where he made passing reference to the interview, always with a dismissive wave of his hand, calling it just another attempt by the media to take him down, before launching into promises for the future that sent his crowds into roaring applause. Clips of his takedown of Daniel Foster were played on loop at these events, often accompanied by chants of, "You can't break Trump," and "Tell the truth." By the end of the week, Daniel Foster's show was quietly placed on hiatus. The network issued a vague statement about restructuring and focusing on future content strategy, but nobody was fooled. The headlines were merciless. Daniel Foster ambush backfires spectacularly. Trump turns tables in brutal interview. Network scrambles after interview disaster. Daniel's final blow came when Trump, during an appearance at a town hall days later, was asked about his thoughts on the interview. Trump chuckled, shook his head, and said, "I think sometimes people confuse tough questions with gotcha games. America's not interested in games anymore." The audience erupted in cheers. And just like that, Daniel Foster realized the painful truth. He hadn't simply lost an interview. He had underestimated a man who knew exactly how to take a trap and turn it into his own stage. Trump didn't need to outshout him. He didn't need to destroy him with anger. He had done it with calm, with clarity, and with confidence that left Daniel flailing for relevance. And in the end, Daniel wasn't remembered as the interviewer who took down Donald Trump. He was remembered as the man who tried and failed on live television, with the whole world watching.